Joining us now, live from Cairo, our man in the Middle East. It's been like Eddie Yeranian week. Third time he's been on this week. Sometimes we go a month without talking to him. Now he's like back to being the anchor. Eddie Yeranian, my man in Cairo, good morning.
Good morning, John. We do have a lot of things happening out here in this part of the world, that's for sure.
It is definitely Eddie Yeranian week. Now, let's go to Bibi. This is pretty serious. Now, you've got Israeli police say they want to indict him on charges of corruption, bribery. Now it's in the hands of the Israeli Attorney General, which is a member of his party. I mean, these are pretty serious charges, and the Israeli police not kidding around here. Tell us what happened and what you think the outcome will be.
Well, as far as what happened, Prime Minister Netanyahu is being accused of taking bribes, which are not extremely valuable in terms of his overall assets. Apparently, he took something like $250,000 in bribes from a Hollywood mogul, which ironically were, according to the press, gifts of cigars, champagne, and jewelry. I'm not sure what kind of jewelry, they didn't say, but $250,000-$80,000 worth of jewelry don't go far. So it isn't really all that much. I think in olden days, government officials in many countries were allowed to keep gifts. One of the damning charges, though, is that he favored one of the Israeli newspapers, the Yediot Ahronot newspaper, if it were to give him good coverage, and favoring in the sense that he would put pressure on one of its rivals. Now, that remains to be proven. Also, apparently, according to the media, the person who accused Netanyahu or gave the information to the police, assuming it's true, the allegations that he took gifts of champagne and cigars and jewelry, was one of his political rivals who stands to become prime minister or has a good chance of becoming prime minister if Netanyahu were not in the picture. So obviously you have to look at where the accusations are coming from. At the moment, it doesn't look like the prime minister is under a lot of pressure. He appears to be weathering the storm. His coalition seems to be standing behind him. And the Israeli media itself says that Prime Minister Netanyahu's base is fairly loyal. Of course, one of his predecessors went to jail, so it could happen. It's not entirely unlikely, but certainly they're saying, at least his defense minister is saying, that he will stay in office at least until any charges were made, assuming they will be made, which is not really clear either.
Okay, so the Israeli police have these charges, right? So they bring it to the Israeli Attorney General, and now it's up to the Attorney General whether or not to file an indictment, right?
Yes, and the defense minister was saying until the Attorney General files an indictment, the Prime Minister will definitely stay in office. After that is anyone's guess. Of course, as I said, one of his predecessors is in jail, or was in jail up until recently.
So if the Israeli Attorney General, right, and it's a member of Bibi's same party. So if the Attorney General, I mean, it's the same thing in our country, right? So if the Attorney General looks at the evidence from the police and the prosecutors and looks at it and says, you know what, there just isn't enough here for me to indict, is that the end of it?
Well, I mean, he could come under pressure in the upcoming elections from voters, of course. Is that the end of it? I don't know. I mean, it depends if there's public pressure also on him to step down. I mean, you're always hearing about demonstrations in Tel Aviv against him here and there, never very large. But, of course, you know that Israeli politics, to some degree, is mixed up with American politics.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the same players who organize demonstrations in the U.S. probably, one assumes, organize demonstrations in Israel because they don't like him. He's conservative, and they would like to see the Labor or whatever other leftist parties replace him. Many of the pressure groups would like to see a peace deal with the Palestinians, and they believe, rightly or wrongly, that a labor or a leftist coalition has more of a chance of cutting a deal with the Palestinians than Bibi Netanyahu does. So there's some of that mixed up in the political situation as well.
Okay, I'm starting to get what you're saying. There's a lot of politics, Eddie Yeranian, that are going on here, right? Just a lot of pure politics in Israel and within the Israeli various parties, people vying for different offices. Just make a prediction. Do you think he'll be indicted or not?
Off the top of my head, I'd say no. I don't think $250,000 is really a massive bribe in today's world, especially not if you consider that they're cigars and champagne, and could also be construed as a gift. And the recommendation or the person who snitched on him is someone in the political world who stands to gain by his removal from office. So I think you have to look at where the accusation is coming from, the scope of the gift, and really I don't see a lot of outrage, from the Israeli public so far.
Okay, I kind of think you're right. Edward Yeranian in Cairo, I don't really think we're going to see an indictment here. And it's tough to prove there was collusion between the prime minister and a publisher of an Israeli paper. And, publishers have a lot of latitude to do what they please. And maybe he's a supporter of his. And that's very tough to prove. And then I think the other thing where we've got his recipient of gifts. I mean, I don't think in looking into Israeli law, they don't have the stringent rules that we do on gift giving. So I think both of these are stretches, really. I was surprised that the cops even are trying to get an indictment with this stuff, but we'll see what plays out. So, Edward, at the montage at the top of the hour, a U.S. plane taking out Russian tank.
Soviet-era tank.
Yes.
That is correct. I mean, it's an older model, I believe. I believe it's a T-72. I can't say exactly when they first came out.
A T-72 would be a Soviet-era tank, right?
I think so. It's borderline, but yeah, it could. I think it could be. Also, this story was in the news, some days ago. It's not, it didn't happen yesterday, but the reporting we heard initially was that the encounter took place in the north of Syria, not east of the Euphrates River. Which is what I'm seeing in the media today. So either there were several different attacks or the initial report was wrong. I'm guessing the latter. This is near the eastern Syrian desert city of Deir Zor. Deir Zor is, I think, the fourth largest city in Syria. It's right next to the river, so it's a very fertile area. And it took place, according to the reports, east of the river, which is an area that the U.S. U.S.-backed Kurdish militia, along with our forces, apparently, I know we have forces in various areas along that region, are present. Now, why are they there? I mean, a lot of people have been asking that question, but there is a good reason as well as probably a couple bad ones. But the good reason is that we've been trying to stop the Iranians from having a corridor all the way from Tehran to Beirut, and controlling that highway that goes by Deir Zor would, of course, give the Iranians their direct route from Tehran to Beirut. And the Israelis, of course, as we discussed a couple days ago, don't want the Hezbollah militia or any other Iranian militias loaded with rockets, on their border. And of course, the Iranians have been sending them rockets, regularly for the last, at least the last 10 years.
So U.S. military is saying that they were provoked, right? So how does this play out on the international scene?
No, I don't. I wouldn't dispute that. Yeah, apparently the Russian unit or Russian-backed unit, I don't want to even say that. I mean, they're apparently mercenaries, according to the Arab media.
Right.
Russians fighting for President Assad, but perhaps in the same way we have mercenaries fighting for these the Kurdish militia in the north.
That's right.
We also have regular troops fighting with the Kurdish militia. But I mean, earlier during the battle for Kobani, which I guess at least 2 years ago, we had real American mercenaries or Americans that had joined the Kurdish forces to defend that town. So was this? Was the Russian government behind this? Some U.S. media is saying yes, and the U.S. military was, or at least the coalition report was saying that this looked a lot like a regular army unit, judging by the way it was marching in formation or driving in formation, and it looked like a major attack, not just a fly-by-night operation. So. The Russians are denying, of course, that they were behind this. They're saying they were mercenaries and they have no control over mercenaries, which they also claim in the Ukraine. And clearly there, they are to some degree supported by the government. So, this could morph into a direct conflict, but I don't think anyone really wants it to. I don't think President Putin does. I don't think President Trump does. And I don't think the U.S. military or the Russian military do either. So thank God for small favors.
And I don't think Assad wants it either. And look, I've said this 1,000 times. This is 1001. The best thing we can do is get the hell out of Syria. All these things do is throw matches on fire. Why we're there, what our mission is, what we're doing. No one has any idea. And nothing good can come of it, Edward. Nothing good can come of our continued involvement in the Syrian civil war. It's only like, how bad will it be? What is the level of downside? There's absolutely no upside. Nothing good can come of it. Assad is not going to be deposed. The Russian Federation stands behind him. He's his ally. He's not going anywhere. He's gaining territory. We don't even know who the enemy is. We've wasted billions of dollars in their lives. And all you're going to get is things like this. Any conflict that we're involved in, this is even worse than Afghanistan, because it makes no sense whatsoever. And you look at our involvement there, and the only people that are in favor of this are the neocons that just want to influence every angle of the world with our military, of the pure neocons, and those that profit from these conflicts, the war makers of military supplies, the military industrial money machine complex. That's it. Why we're involved in this thing is beyond me. And that really should be the question, not, were we provoked? Were they backed by the Russians? How did it look? Why did we take the tank out? The real question should be, why the hell are we even in this position? Don't you agree with me?
Yes, I do. And we've both been trying to say that for a long time.
5 years.
And while we've been saying that, a lot of other people have been trying to suck us in, and they're still trying to suck us in. They haven't given up. And, of course, I've been in the Middle East for 30 years, and I remember Iraq. It started, and I'll remind people, it started, at least according to the Arab media, when U.S. Ambassador to Baghdad, April Glaspie, apparently, I say apparently because there were media reports that she told Saddam Hussein that it was okay to take action against Kuwait because Kuwait was doing vertical drilling for oil fields that went under the border into Iraq. And Saddam Hussein reportedly asked her if the U.S. would respond if he did that, if he took action, and she said no. And, of course, she resigned later. And, of course, if you remember the more recent Iraq conflict, that's 2003. I was talking about 1991, 1990. But the 2003 conflict, of course, we had a lot of misinformation. We, at the time, reported as just misinformation about weapons of mass destruction. But if you look at the entire picture, looking back on it, of course, I remember I was covering that, and there were many reports that were deliberate misinformation, things like Saddam Hussein meeting with an al-Qaeda agent in Prague,
all false.
Or one of his intelligence people, about Saddam Hussein buying yellow cake uranium from Niger. That's
false.
A deliberate lie.
False.
So,
all false. All lies in order to get us sucked in. But you're right. If you go back to the genesis of this, to the embryonic stages of this conflict we're involved in the Middle East, you go back to April Gillespie, right? Like you said, who was our ambassador to Iraq at the time. And Saddam Hussein went to her. Now, we had a long-standing, Edward, as you know, 40-year policy of not getting involved in Middle Eastern tribal conflicts, right? I mean, our position consistently in anything was do what you want, we're not involved, right? We're just not involved. And when Saddam Hussein went to April Gillespie, who the neocons ended up throwing under the bus, she did the right thing. She responded back to Saddam Hussein with what had been a 35-year U.S. diplomatic policy in the Middle East, which is we're not involved in these conflicts. And Saddam Hussein went to her and said, look, Kuwait is my, what was it, the 19th province? Is that what he was saying? Or was it the 9th?
Yeah.
The 19th.
I believe, I can't remember. I think they have around 9 provinces, but I don't know the exact number.
Yeah, the 9th, right? The 9th, not the 9th. He said, Kuwait is the 9th Iraq province, and we are going to move on it and annex them. And our ambassador was like, well, we're just not involved. I mean, that's your internal thing. And so they did that. They went in, they overtook the libraries, the banks, they took the money, whatever. And then we decided to get involved. And then they blamed April Gillespie for not telling Saddam Hussein what the consequences were. There were no consequences based on a 35-year diplomatic policy we had there. And so we had no business getting involved in that. The Saudis were involved. We had no business getting involved in that Kuwait liberation. They were not an ally. There was no treaty. They were not part of NATO. Nothing. And that was their deal. And if the Saudis were mad, they should have gotten involved in it. That's the thing that started, and now we're still paying the price 40 years later. It's unbelievable.